What could have been a rich diversity in the makeup of our society was now being pruned, reduced to one main strand. Many Protestants who feared the victory of the insurgents, who feared there would be no place for them in the Gaelic Catholic Ireland, took what they could and got out, to the north or to Britain. The people who gave us Wolfe and Emmet felt neither safe nor wanted. They had always been few enough in the south of the country, just 10% at the turn of the century, but that had halved by the time of the Eucharistic Congress. Now there was a declared Protestant state for a Protestant people north of the border, and no less a Catholic state to the south. De Valera looked into his heart and saw clearly that the true Irishman was Gaelic and Catholic. The first constitution of the new state had made no mention of the church. The British had left us a measure through which 4 Catholic bishops and 2 from the Church of Ireland could be appointed to the Senate, but the government didn't appoint any clerics. They reduced the church's role in education, tightening the government's own grip. Looking down over the border, Unionists were surprised, even relieved and pleased. But a courtship dance was underway between the men of the church and the revolutionaries, some of whom they had not so long ago excommunicated for their armed struggle. That had been rationalized away by the then insurgents on the basis that politics were none of the church's business. But now, as our politicians, the same men seemed to accept that our laws would reflect Catholic moral values. Perhaps it was all very natural. They came of the same social source as our churchmen, and they were devout Catholics almost to a man. A Catholic tide was running. And divorce was the first target. When the Free State was set up, we inherited from Britain a very limited access to divorce by way of a private member's bill which had to be presented to the House of Lords. But now the Irish Parliament had jurisdiction in that, and 3 bills requesting divorce were presented. The government's reaction was swift. In the view of the majority, marriage was a sacramental bond incapable of dissolution, said William T. Cosgrave, leader of the government, who promptly changed the law and made it impossible to seek a divorce. W.B. Yeats denounced the move as grossly oppressive to Protestants, defending, he said, rights won by the labors of John Milton and other great men, won by strife, which is a famous part of the history of the Protestant people. In the early years of the infant state and before, contraceptives had been freely available. Now the government made it illegal to advocate their use, and within a few years it had become a criminal act to import or sell them. Even the opening times of pubs were revised under a new law. And in that broad social mood of imposed piety and purity, we introduced censorship laws which were to enter us on a long night of the mind and heart, as many writers saw it. New censorship laws governed films and publications. They introduced the censorship board, while taxes were brought in to avert our eyes from what were described as the scurrilous and immoral British press, which was undermining Irish moral characteristics and corrupting the people. But writers like Yeats and George Russell, Lennox Robinson and Oliver St. John Gogarty, and the younger O'Faolain and O'Connor denounced it all as repressive of young writers and of freedom of thought and expression. It all expelled some writers and crushed others, and it perpetuated a cultural poverty for all, so that we were no longer pollinated with the germinating ideas born from abroad. Yeats saw in those laws religious bigotry and a zealot's idea of the kingdom of God on earth, making us an island of moral cards, he said. But to the church and to the fervent laymen who enthusiastically policed the new laws, those critics were dismissed as simply being out of touch with Irish taste. That Irish taste apparently didn't extend to Hemingway or Steinbeck, Jean-Paul Sartre, André Gide, Graham Greene, even Bertrand Russell or Dr. Maury Stopes, all of whom were blacklisted. During the 30s, a little over 100 books a year were banned. But in the 50s, as if in reaction to a newly set up appeals board, that had jumped to over 600 a year. Amongst others, we banned Lemur Flaherty, O'Faolain, Kate O'Brien, and Eric Cross's story of the tailor in Anstey, which led to a bemused Sir Richard Keane questioning in the Senate why, with Europe at war, we were locked in debate of the innocently recorded Rabelaisian directness of speech characteristic of country life almost everywhere. And a County Clare librarian, Dermot Foley, lamented that his library had been reduced to serving an Irish stew of westerns, sloppy romances, and blood and murders, bearing the nihil obstat of 52 vigilantes. So it was Yeats and George Russell, Shaw and O'Fwelon, those of the Protestant church or of no church, who fought. But the already weakened, perhaps defeated caste could not prevail. It was in that atmosphere that a Protestant lady, Miss Letitia Dunbar Harrison, was appointed librarian for County Mayo. The library committee met to endorse the move. The bishop, 5 priests, a Christian brother, the Protestant rector, and 4 laymen. By 10 votes to 2, they decided that a Protestant shouldn't get the job. She was unfit to supervise the reading material of Catholic Mayo. The Clonagale government nevertheless gave the lady the job and sacked the county council, only to find the good people of Mayo boycotting the library service. Eventually, Miss Dunbar Harrison had to be given a job elsewhere. The visionary De Valera not only declared that a Catholic people were entitled to a Catholic librarian, he waded further into murky waters, saying that a Catholic community was also entitled to a Catholic dispensary doctor, so that at the critical moment of death, one of their own faith would be by their side. And the convergence of the words Irish and Catholic reached its zenith in the De Valera Constitution of 1937, which would replace the original constitution bargained with the British. It carried the stamp of Catholic teaching, saying that no law shall grant the dissolution of marriage, and adding that the state recognize the special position of the Holy Catholic, Apostolic and Roman Church as the guardian of the faith professed by the great majority of the citizens. The Protestant voice against the special position of the Catholic Church, against new laws on censorship, divorce, contraception, was softly spoken with no expectation of influencing the monolith. So whose were the minds which had discreetly won this written guarantee of the Church's will? The social counterparts of those who now controlled government, our new lawmakers. The sons of farmers and shopkeepers drawn from the ranks of the people. Their discovery of a vocation sometimes helped by families aware that the farm or shop could only be inherited by one son, so another might benefit from the social status of the priesthood and the preferment of a mighty power in our society. But even in that, there was a subtle class divide. Would-be clerics were not equal before God's recruiting officers. It was the diocesan seminaries, and later a parish, only for those whose families had the money to pay the college fees. Other ranks, the non-payers, would have to settle for the Columban missions and a training for a diocese in Australia or the missions in Africa or China. Off went the farmers' sons to Maynooth, where one novelist priest encountered dogma, theology, narrow certitude, and intellectual poverty. Its library without any general culture, he found. Here were produced the privates and NCOs, the priests and monsignori, some of whom would become the officer class, the bishops and archbishops of the church. Thinkers, it was said, were penned in facile scholasticism. Debate was stifled. What was good enough for our saints and fathers was good enough for them. And here the novelist Father Ralph found church, farmer, gum-bean man and publican in alliance, each achieving what they could within the status quo. An earlier rite had sought imparting learning, but not culture, sending out men devoid of the graces, of the sweetness and light of modern civilization. That class awareness crossed the aisle to the devout women who would take the veil, who, of their belief and concern for people, would, as the phrase went, become brides of Christ. Those whose families had land or who were in business could provide what was called a dowry. They could pay. So they were accepted into perhaps one of the elite teaching orders. Their recruitment message went into the classrooms of young ladies whose family background, social standing and wealth were were assumed. Here they found their postulants. The equally devout and fervent daughters of those who merely worked the land or tended the shop counter could not afford the dowry, and literally became the handmaidens of the Lord, tending the poor of the slums side by side with the kindly lay people of the Society of St. Vincent de Paul, and fueled by the words, "I hungered and you gave me to eat, I thirst and you gave me to drink." And it was nuns who devoted themselves to the sick, running our hospitals, selflessly giving themselves to a grueling, sometimes heart-rending task, because Christ was amongst the sick. A combined clergy gave us an educational system which we probably could not have afforded otherwise, even if they did see themselves as fishermen of souls. A Catholic education would naturally produce the future generations of the faithful, and their priests, brothers and nuns, produce continuity. It would place Catholics and their moral values in the decision-making classes, in public administration, politics, business, the law, and medicine. Shape the mind, and you shape the man and his future actions. Thus, the Church did a deal with the new Free State. They would agree that the new vocational education schools, aimed largely at the working classes, could be controlled by laymen, by county councillors, if the state, in turn, left the Church with the again largely middle class or those who aspired to it. In the 1500-year journey from that Paschal fire at Slane, through challenge and suppression, the Church in Ireland had survived and climbed to achieve the peak of its power and influence. A church drawn from the people, integrated into the lives of a people unquestioningly devoted. A church whose priests and bishops were of the same seed, breed, and generation as figures of government. But having been to the mountain's peak, what could the future hold for it?